I stood in my driveway staring at the empty concrete pad where my 1987 Winnebago Chieftain had been parked for exactly 3 weeks, and my first thought was that someone had stolen it. My second thought, when I saw the smug expression on Brenda Patterson's face as she walked down the sidewalk toward me with a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, was that this was going to be so much worse than theft. "Good morning, Parker," she called out in that saccharine voice that made my teeth ache. "I see you noticed the removal of that eyesore that's been plaguing our beautiful community." I turned to face her fully, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Brenda, where is my RV?" She adjusted her oversized sunglasses and consulted her clipboard with exaggerated care. According to Section 12.4 of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA bylaws, any vehicle deemed abandoned on private property for more than 14 days without proper registration, visible, can be reported to the appropriate authorities for removal. I filed the report 17 days ago, and the towing company came this morning to haul it away. That RV wasn't abandoned. I was restoring it. And it was parked on my property, behind my house, not even visible from the street. Brenda's lips pursed into a thin line. "Nevertheless, Mr. Crawford, the rules apply to all residents equally. The vehicle had expired tags from 1995. No current registration displayed and appeared to be inoperable. I followed proper procedure." "Where did they take it?" "I believe Elite Auto Salvage on Route 47 in Mesa, Arizona. They handle all abandoned vehicle disposals for the county." She paused, then added with false sympathy, "I'm sure you can retrieve any personal belongings if you act quickly. They typically process these vehicles within 72 hours. My stomach dropped. "Process? What does that mean?" "Crushed and scrapped, of course. We can't have these salvage yards cluttered with junk vehicles indefinitely." She gave me a tight smile. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have 3 more violation notices to deliver this morning. The Hendersons have been letting their grass grow to 4.2 inches, which is 0.7 inches over regulation height." I didn't wait for her to finish. I was already running back into my house, grabbing my keys and wallet, and pulling up the address for Elite Auto Salvage on my phone. The drive from my neighborhood in Scottsdale to Mesa took 35 minutes in midday traffic, and I spent every second of it alternating between fury and panic. That Winnebago wasn't just some broken-down RV. 6 months ago, I'd bought it from an estate sale for $4,000, and I'd immediately recognized what I had. It was a limited edition Chieftain with the original interior completely intact, including the rare teak wood cabinetry and the custom upholstery that Winnebago had only produced for 1 year. I'd spent the last 6 months quietly restoring it in my spare time, tracking down original parts and corresponding with collectors who specialized in vintage RVs. 3 different buyers had already expressed serious interest, with the highest offer sitting at $62,000 from a collector in Oregon who specialized in 1980s Winnebagos. I'd parked it behind my house specifically to keep it safe while I waited for the last few parts to arrive. The engine was fully rebuilt, the interior was 90% complete, and I'd been planning to deliver it to the buyer in 2 weeks. Elite Auto Salvage sat on 5 acres of dirt and chain-link fence, with rows of crushed cars stacked like metallic pancakes. A trailer office squatted near the entrance, its windows covered in sun-faded advertisements for scrap metal prices. I parked and practically ran inside, where a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain looked up from her computer. "Help you?" "Someone towed my RV here this morning. A 1987 Winnebago Chieftain. I need it back immediately." She turned to her computer and typed slowly. "You got paperwork?" "No, I just found out it was towed. The HOA reported it as abandoned, but it wasn't abandoned. It was parked on my own property." "Registration?" "It's in the vehicle. Look, this is a mistake. That RV is worth over $60,000. I need to get it back before anything happens to it." Her expression shifted slightly. "Hold on." She picked up her phone and dialed. "Tony. Yeah, we got someone here about that Winnebago that came in this morning." A pause. "Uh-huh. Yeah." She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "When?" Another pause. "Okay." She hung up and shook her head. "I'm real sorry, but that vehicle was processed at 11:15 this morning." The world tilted. Processed meaning what? crushed and baled. It's already on the truck heading to the metal recycling plant in Phoenix. I gripped the counter edge. You crushed it? It's been here less than 6 hours. Standard procedure for abandoned vehicles. We got to move inventory fast. Your HOA representative signed off on the immediate disposal due to it being an eyesore and potential environmental hazard. Something about leaking fluids? It wasn't leaking anything. The engine was completely rebuilt. There wasn't a single leak. I pulled out my phone and showed her photos of the RV. Look at this. Does this look like a junk vehicle to you? She studied the photos and her face paled. Oh no, that's a collector's vehicle. Yes, and now it's crushed. I need to speak to your supervisor. I need to speak to whoever authorized this. Tony emerged from a back office, a barrel-chested man in his 60s with grease-stained coveralls. I'm the owner, I heard. Look, son, I'm real sorry, but we followed procedure. We got the abandoned vehicle report, verified it with the county, and the HOA representative provided written confirmation that immediate disposal was requested due to safety concerns. What safety concerns? It was parked behind my house. It wasn't bothering anyone. According to the report, it was attracting rodents and had multiple code violations. He pulled out a file folder. See? Right here. Brenda Patterson, HOA board president, signed off on emergency disposal. I took the form and read it carefully. Brenda's signature was at the bottom, along with check marks next to boxes that claimed the vehicle was leaking hazardous materials, attracting vermin, and creating a public health hazard. Every single claim was a lie. This is fraud, I said quietly. None of this is true. She lied on an official form to have my property destroyed. Tony scratched his jaw. That's between you and your HOA. We just follow the paperwork. But I'll tell you what. I'll give you the contact information for the recycling plant. If you can get there before they process the bale, you might be able to recover something. And I'll note in our records that there was a dispute about the vehicle's status. I want copies of everything, the tow order, the disposal authorization, all of it. He nodded and started making copies while I called the recycling plant. They confirmed that a truck with crushed vehicles had arrived 20 minutes ago, but hadn't been processed yet. I thanked Tony, grabbed my copies, and drove to Phoenix like my life depended on it. The recycling plant was a massive facility with conveyor belts, crushing machines, and mountains of twisted metal. I found the office and explained the situation to a manager named Luis, who took me out to the yard where the crushed bales sat waiting. That one, he said, pointing to a cube of compressed metal that barely resembled anything that had once been a vehicle. That's what came in from Elite. I'm real sorry, man, but there's no uncrushing it. It's totaled. I stood there looking at what had been $60,000 and 6 months of work compressed into a 3-foot cube. Inside that metal tomb were the original teak cabinets, the custom upholstery, the rebuilt engine, and all the rare parts I'd painstakingly tracked down and installed. I need photos, I said, and I need documentation that this was the RV, along with the paperwork trail showing when it arrived and from where. Luis helped me document everything, providing shipping manifests and timestamps. By the time I left Phoenix, it was almost 5 in the evening, and I had a folder full of evidence and a phone full of photos showing the crushed remains of my investment. I drove straight to an attorney's office. I'd done legal work with Marcus Webb before when I'd had a contract dispute with a client. His office was in a small building near Old Town Scottsdale, and I caught him just as he was packing up for the day. Parker Crawford, he said, shaking my hand. What brings you in without an appointment? I need to sue my HOA, and I need to file a police report for fraud and destruction of property. He gestured to a chair, and I laid out the whole story, showing him the photos, the paperwork, and the timeline. He listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. This is bad. Really bad. For them, I mean. What you're describing is potentially criminal fraud, filing a false report, and destruction of property. The value pushes it into felony territory. What can I do? First, we file a police report tonight. Then, I'll draft a demand letter to the HOA and to Brenda Patterson personally, putting them on notice that we're pursuing legal action. We'll need to get appraisals and documentation of the RV's actual value. You said you had offers? Written offers, emails. I can get statements from the collectors who wanted to buy it. Good. We'll need those. We'll also subpoena all the HOA records related to this incident, including any board meetings, emails, and internal communications. If Brenda Patterson acted alone, the HOA might try to distance themselves from her actions. If they supported or authorized what she did, we go after the entire organization and potentially the individual board members. I want her arrested, I said. She deliberately lied on official documents to have my property destroyed. That's not just a civil matter. I agree. The police might be hesitant to get involved in what looks like a civil HOA dispute, but the fraud aspect changes things. Let me make some calls. We spent the next 2 hours at the Scottsdale Police Department, where I filed a formal complaint. The officer who took my report, Detective Sarah Martinez, reviewed all my documentation carefully. This is unusual, she said. We don't typically see HOA disputes escalate to this level. But you're right that the false statements on the disposal authorization form constitute fraud, and the value of the vehicle makes the destruction a felony. What happens now? I'll open an investigation. We'll interview Ms. Patterson and the other HOA board members. We'll examine the bylaws and the procedures that were allegedly followed. If we find evidence of criminal fraud, we'll forward it to the county attorney for prosecution. It was almost 10 at night by the time I got home. The empty concrete pad behind my house looked like a grave. I'd parked the Winnebago there because it was private and protected, away from street traffic and weather. Brenda Patterson would have had to come onto my property and go into my backyard to even see it. I pulled up the Meadowbrook Estates HOA bylaws on my computer and read through Section 12.4. It covered abandoned vehicles, but the definition was specific. A vehicle was considered abandoned if it was inoperable, unregistered, and left on common property or visible from the street for more than 30 days. My RV hadn't met any of those criteria. It was operable, it was registered to me even if the tags were expired, and it wasn't on common property or visible from the street. Brenda had invented reasons to have it towed and crushed. The question was why. I started going through my emails and found the community message board for Meadowbrook Estates. 3 months ago, there had been a heated discussion about an HOA proposal to increase dues by 40% to fund a new community center. I'd been one of the most vocal opponents, pointing out that the current dues were already excessive and that the proposed community center was unnecessary. The vote had failed by a narrow margin, which I'd heard had infuriated Brenda Patterson. 2 months ago, I'd filed a formal complaint about Brenda measuring people's grass with a ruler and issuing fines for violations as small as half an inch. I'd called it harassment and proposed a vote to remove her from the board. That proposal hadn't gotten enough signatures to proceed, but it had been close. This wasn't about my RV being an eyesore. This was revenge. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls. 10 were from Brenda Patterson, 4 were from other HOA board members, 3 were from neighbors. I ignored all of them and focused on building my case. I contacted the Oregon collector who'd offered $62,000 for the Winnebago. His name was Dennis Kowalski, and he was devastated when I told him what had happened. That was one of only 14 chieftains built with that interior package, he said over the phone. I've been looking for one for 8 years. I had the cashier's check ready to go. I'm so sorry, Parker. Is there anything I can do to help? I need you to provide a written statement of the offer you made, along with your credentials as a collector and appraiser of vintage RVs. I'll have it to you by end of business today. And Parker? If you need an expert witness for a trial, I'm there. What happened to that vehicle is a crime against history. I collected statements from 2 other collectors who'd made offers, both in the $50,000 range. I gathered all my receipts for parts and restoration work, which totaled just over $18,000. I compiled photos showing the progression of the restoration, with timestamps proving that the work was ongoing and recent. Marcus called me at noon. The HOA has lawyered up. I got a call from their attorney, Gregory Walsh. He claims that Brenda Patterson followed proper procedure and that you're at fault for keeping an unregistered vehicle on your property. The bylaws don't support that interpretation. I know. I told him as much. He's trying to bluster his way through this, but I don't think he's actually read the bylaws carefully. I've drafted the demand letter. We're asking for $62,000 in actual damages, $18,000 in restoration costs, and $50,000 in punitive damages, total of $130,000. What are the chances they pay? Low, initially. They'll want to fight this, but once discovery starts and we expose the fraud, they'll likely settle to avoid a trial. HOAs are risk-averse. The board members can be held personally liable if they authorized wrongful actions. I want this to go to trial, I said. I want everyone to know what Brenda Patterson did. That's your choice, but trials are expensive and time-consuming. We might be looking at a year or more before we get a court date. I don't care. She destroyed something I'd put months of work into. She lied on official documents. If I just settle quietly, she'll do this to someone else. Fair enough, I'll proceed on that basis, but be prepared for this to get ugly. HOAs can be vindictive, and if Brenda Patterson is willing to commit fraud to destroy your property, she's not going to back down easily. He was right about the ugly part. That evening, I found a violation notice on my door claiming that my grass was too long, my mailbox was the wrong shade of black, and my house numbers weren't properly aligned. Each violation came with a $200 fine. I took photos of my grass, which was freshly mowed at exactly 3 inches, the regulation height. I took photos of my mailbox next to my neighbor's identical mailbox. I took photos of my house numbers with a level showing they were perfectly straight. Then, I posted all of it on the community message board with the caption, "This is what retaliation looks like." The response was immediate and polarizing. Some neighbors supported me, sharing their own stories of what they considered excessive enforcement by Brenda Patterson. Others defended her, claiming that strict enforcement was necessary to maintain property values. The message board descended into chaos, with accusations flying in both directions. The HOA board called an emergency meeting for the following week. According to the bylaws, any homeowner could attend board meetings, so I showed up with Marcus Webb. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that mostly got used for baby showers and birthday parties. Brenda Patterson sat at the head of a folding table with 4 other board members: Kevin Hart, an accountant in his 50s, Jennifer Morrison, a real estate agent in her 40s, David Chen, a retired engineer in his 60s, and Patricia Walters, a yoga instructor in her 30s. The room was packed with neighbors, maybe 40 people in total. Brenda gavelled the meeting to order with obvious irritation. This emergency session has been called to address false accusations being made against the HOA, and specifically against me, she began. Mr. Crawford has been spreading lies on the community message board, claiming that I acted improperly regarding an abandoned vehicle on his property. Marcus stood. Point of order, Mr. Crawford has made no false statements. Everything he's posted is documented fact. This isn't a court of law, Mr. Webb. You don't get to speak here. Actually, according to your own bylaws, any homeowner can designate a representative to speak on their behalf at board meetings. I'm Mr. Crawford's designated representative. Brenda's face flushed red. Fine. Say what you came to say and then leave. Marcus pulled out copies of the documents I'd gathered and distributed them to the board members. What we have here is a clear case of fraud and abuse of power. Ms. Patterson filed a false report claiming that Mr. Crawford's vehicle was abandoned, leaking hazardous materials, attracting vermin, and creating a public health hazard. None of these claims were true. The vehicle was a valuable collector's item undergoing restoration. Ms. Patterson deliberately lied on official documents to have it destroyed, causing damages in excess of $80,000. That vehicle was an eyesore, Brenda snapped, and it violated multiple bylaws. Which bylaws, specifically? Marcus asked. Section 12.4 regarding abandoned vehicles. Section 12.4 applies only to vehicles that are inoperable, unregistered, and left on common property or visible from the street for more than 30 days. Mr. Crawford's RV met none of those criteria. It was operable, registered to him, parked on his private property, and not visible from the street. Furthermore, even if it had violated Section 12.4, the bylaws require written notice to the homeowner and an opportunity to cure the violation before any enforcement action. Mr. Crawford received no notice. Kevin Hart, the accountant, was reading through the documents with increasing alarm. Brenda, is this true? Did you file a false report? I did not file a false report. That vehicle was a health hazard. Based on what evidence? Marcus asked. Based on my visual inspection. When did you conduct this visual inspection? 3 weeks ago. So you entered Mr. Crawford's property without permission to inspect a vehicle that was parked behind his house, not visible from the street? The other board members were looking at Brenda with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. Jennifer Morrison raised her hand. I'd like to see photos of this vehicle before it was removed. I stood up and pulled out my phone, then projected it onto the clubhouse screen using the provided equipment. The photos showed the Winnebago in pristine condition, gleaming in the sun, with clear shots of the rebuilt engine, the restored interior, and the complete lack of any leaking fluids or rodent infestation. The room erupted in murmurs. David Chen stood up. Brenda, this doesn't look like an abandoned vehicle to me. This looks like a very nice RV. It had expired tags. Lots of vehicles undergoing restoration have expired tags, Chen said. That's not grounds for emergency disposal. Patricia Walters was staring at the documents Marcus had distributed. It says here, you authorized immediate crushing without waiting for the standard holding period. Why? Because it was taking up space and I wanted it gone. The room went silent. Brenda seemed to realize she'd said the wrong thing, but it was too late. Kevin Hart closed the folder in front of him. I move that we immediately suspend Ms. Patterson from her position as HOA president pending an investigation into these allegations. Second, Jennifer Morrison said immediately. This is ridiculous, Brenda said. You're going to let this man bully us into abandoning our standards? Call for a vote, David Chen said. The vote was 4-1, with Brenda being the only no. She was suspended effective immediately, and Kevin Hart was appointed interim president. The meeting continued for another hour, with multiple neighbors standing up to share their own stories of what they considered harassment by Brenda Patterson. As we were leaving, a woman in her 30s approached me. I'm Rebecca Torres. I live 2 streets over. 3 months ago, Brenda had my son's basketball hoop removed because she said it was an unapproved structure. It was one of those portable hoops that you fill with water. My son was devastated. I filed a complaint, but nothing happened because Brenda controlled the board. I'm sorry that happened, I said. Don't be sorry. I'm going to file a formal complaint with the county about her conduct, and I'm going to encourage everyone else she's harassed to do the same. What she did to you was criminal, but what she's been doing to this whole neighborhood is wrong. Over the next few days, the local news picked up the story. A reporter from the Arizona Republic called me, and I gave her the full account. The story ran with the headline, HOA president accused of fraud after vintage RV destroyed, and included photos of the crushed metal cube that had been my Winnebago. The story went viral locally, then nationally. I started getting calls from news programs, podcasts, and even a documentary filmmaker who specialized in HOA abuse cases. The story struck a nerve with people who'd had their own nightmarish experiences with overzealous HOAs. Detective Martinez called me a week after I'd filed the report. We've completed our initial investigation. Based on the evidence, we're moving forward with criminal charges against Brenda Patterson. The county attorney has authorized charges of fraud, filing a false instrument, and criminal damage to property. The total value of your loss pushes this into Class 4 felony territory. When will she be arrested? We're coordinating with her attorney. She'll likely turn herself in rather than us showing up at her door. She'll be booked, arraigned, and released on bond pending trial. What about the HOA as an organization? We don't have enough evidence that the other board members knew about or authorized her actions. This appears to be Brenda acting alone, motivated by personal animosity. The civil case between you and the HOA is separate. 2 days later, I was at work when my phone exploded with notifications. Brenda Patterson had been arrested, booked into the Maricopa County Jail, and released on $20,000 bond. Her mugshot was all over social media, and the story had reached national news outlets. My phone rang. It was Gregory Walsh, the HOA's attorney. Mr. Crawford, I think it's time we talked settlement. This situation has spiraled out of control, and my clients want to resolve it quickly. Your clients meaning the HOA board, not Brenda Patterson. Correct. Ms. Patterson is being represented by separate counsel now. The HOA is willing to offer full compensation for your vehicle, plus your attorney's fees and the cost of any fines that were improperly levied against you. I want $130,000, a written apology posted to every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates, a revision to the bylaws to prevent this from happening again, and Brenda Patterson permanently removed from any HOA position. There was a pause. I'll present that to the board. Marcus and I met with the HOA board 3 days later. Kevin Hart had taken over as president and seemed genuinely apologetic about the whole situation. "We had no idea Brenda was acting this way," he said. "If we'd known she was going onto people's properties without permission and filing false reports, we would have stopped her immediately." "Why didn't anyone stop her before?" I asked. "Multiple people filed complaints." Jennifer Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Brenda had a very strong personality. She convinced us that strict enforcement was necessary, and she handled most of the day-to-day enforcement herself. We trusted her judgment. That trust destroyed my property. We know, and we're prepared to settle. We'll agree to your terms with one modification. The HOA's insurance will cover the settlement amount, but we need you to agree not to pursue individual lawsuits against the board members personally." Marcus and I conferred briefly. "Agreed, provided the settlement includes the written apology and the bylaw changes." Done. The settlement was finalized within 2 weeks. I received a check for $130,000, along with reimbursement for all the fines Brenda had levied against me. The HOA sent a formal letter to every homeowner explaining what had happened and apologizing for the abuse of power. The bylaws were revised to require a vote by the full board before any vehicle could be reported as abandoned, and homeowners were now guaranteed written notice and 30 days to cure any alleged violation before enforcement action. Brenda Patterson's criminal case moved slowly through the system. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the county attorney refused to drop the felony charges. The case eventually went to trial 8 months later. I testified about the RV's value, the restoration work I had done, and the offers I'd received from collectors. Dennis Kowalski flew in from Oregon to testify as an expert witness, explaining the rarity and value of the 1987 Winnebago Chieftain with the teak interior package. The prosecution presented the fraudulent disposal authorization form and the timeline showing that Brenda had acted far outside the normal procedures. Brenda's defense was that she genuinely believed the RV was abandoned and that she'd been acting in the best interests of the community. The jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of trial, they found her guilty on all counts: fraud, filing a false instrument, and criminal damage to property. The judge sentenced her to 3 years of supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, and restitution in the amount of $80,000, which was the documented value of the vehicle and restoration costs. The $130,000 I'd received from the HOA settlement covered my actual losses plus attorney's fees, but the court's restitution order was based on the direct damages Brenda's actions had caused. "Ms. Patterson," the judge said during sentencing, "you abused a position of trust within your community. You fabricated evidence to destroy someone's property out of personal spite. The only reason you're not going to prison is that you have no prior criminal record and because the victim has been made financially whole by the civil settlement. But make no mistake, this was a serious crime, and if you violate the terms of your probation, you will serve time behind bars." I sat in the courtroom gallery watching Brenda's face as the sentence was read. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The imperious attitude was gone, replaced by something that might have been shame. After the trial, I ran into Rebecca Torres in the courthouse parking lot. She'd attended every day of the proceedings. "She's getting what she deserves," Rebecca said. "I just wish it hadn't taken something this extreme to hold her accountable." "What happened with your son's basketball hoop?" "I bought a new one and put it right back where the old one was. The new HOA board approved it immediately." She smiled. "My son wants to write you a thank you letter for standing up to her. He's 11, and he doesn't fully understand everything that happened, but he knows you stopped the mean lady who took his basketball hoop. He doesn't need to thank me. I just wanted my RV back." "Well, you didn't get that, but you got justice. That counts for something." Life in Meadowbrook Estates changed after Brenda Patterson's conviction. The new board under Kevin Hart took a much more reasonable approach to enforcement. Violations still got addressed, but with common sense and communication rather than gotcha tactics and immediate fines. The community message board shifted from being a place of constant conflict to actual neighborly communication. I used part of the settlement money to buy and restore another vintage RV, though I kept this one in a rented storage unit rather than on my property. The paranoia was real, even though the new board had proven themselves reasonable. Some wounds take time to heal. The documentary filmmaker who'd contacted me ended up making a 40-minute film about HOA abuse, with my case as the centerpiece. It premiered at a film festival in Phoenix and later got picked up by a streaming service. I did a Q&A after the premiere, and the number of people who came up afterward to share their own HOA horror stories was staggering. I'd thought my situation was unique, but apparently abusive HOA boards were more common than I'd realized. Several states ended up using my case as an example when proposing HOA reform legislation. Arizona passed a law requiring HOAs to provide 30 days written notice before any enforcement action, with clear appeals processes for homeowners who disagreed with violations. It wasn't everything advocates wanted, but it was a start. Brenda Patterson disappeared from public life. She moved out of Meadowbrook Estates shortly after her conviction, and I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she'd relocated to Nevada. I never saw her again, which was fine by me. The one thing that still bothered me was the loss of the Winnebago itself. The settlement money compensated me financially, but I'd lost something that couldn't be replaced with cash. That specific vehicle, with its history and rarity, was gone forever. I'd held a piece of automotive history in my hands and watched it get compressed into scrap metal because someone with a clipboard and too much power decided she didn't like me. About a year after the trial, I was at a vintage RV show in Tucson when I met an elderly man named Walter Simmons. He owned a 1987 Winnebago Chieftain with the same teak interior package. His was in rougher shape than mine had been, but it was the same model. "I heard about what happened to you," he said. "Dennis Kowalski told me the story. That was one of the nicest chieftains I've ever seen." "Thanks. I put a lot of work into it." "I'm getting too old to maintain mine properly," Walter said. "My kids don't want it. They think it's junk, but I know it's not. Would you be interested in buying it? I'd rather sell it to someone who'll appreciate it than let it rot in my driveway." We negotiated a fair price, and I bought Walter's Chieftain. It needed work, but the bones were good, and I knew exactly what I was doing this time. I restored it over the course of a year, taking my time and enjoying the process. When it was finished, I didn't sell it. Instead, I took it on a cross-country trip, driving from Arizona to Oregon to Maine to Florida and back, covering over 12,000 miles. That RV became a symbol for me, not of what Brenda Patterson had destroyed, but of what she couldn't destroy. She'd crushed my vehicle, but she hadn't crushed my love for restoration work. She'd cost me money and time, but she hadn't cost me my willingness to stand up against abuse of power. On a warm evening, 2 years after the original incident, I was sitting in a lawn chair behind my house when my neighbor, Frank Rodriguez, came over with 2 beers. "Thought you might want company," he said, handing me one. "Thanks." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. The concrete pad where the original Winnebago had been parked was still empty. I'd thought about parking the new one there, but it felt wrong somehow. That space was a memorial now. "You know," Frank said eventually, "what you did changed things around here. People aren't afraid anymore. We just voted to reduce the HOA dues by 15% because Kevin showed us that half the stuff we were paying for wasn't necessary." Brenda had been padding the budget for years. "I didn't do it to change things. I just wanted my RV back." "I know, but you did change things anyway. That counts." Maybe he was right. I hadn't set out to become some kind of HOA reform crusader, but my fight against Brenda Patterson's abuse had exposed problems that went beyond my crushed RV. The excessive enforcement, the lack of accountability, the fear that kept people from speaking up. All of it had been addressed because one situation had finally gone too far. I thought about that first morning when I'd stood in my driveway staring at the empty space where my Winnebago should have been. I'd been angry and confused and had no idea just how bad things would get before they got better. But I'd fought, and I'd won. And maybe that was the point. The next morning, I drove my restored Chieftain to a regional vintage RV show in Flagstaff. As I parked among the other classics, an older woman approached and started admiring the teak interior. "This is beautiful," she said. "How long did it take you to restore?" "About a year. It's my second one, actually. The first got destroyed by an overzealous HOA president." "Oh, I read about that. That was you? What that woman did was criminal." "It was," I agreed. "She got convicted and sentenced for it." "Good. People like that shouldn't be allowed to run HOAs." She paused, then added, "I'm on my HOA board, and after your story hit the news, we completely rewrote our enforcement procedures. We wanted to make sure nothing like that could happen in our community." It was a small thing, but it mattered. Maybe my crushed Winnebago had saved someone else's project car, or boat or motorcycle from the same fate. Maybe someone else didn't have to go through what I'd gone through. As I stood there in Flagstaff, surrounded by vintage RVs and the people who loved them, I realized something. Brenda Patterson had tried to destroy something I cared about, and she'd succeeded in destroying that specific vehicle. But she'd failed at destroying what really mattered: the community, the connections, the willingness to stand up for what's right. Those things couldn't be crushed into a 3-foot cube and sent to a recycling plant. Later that year, I was approached by a law firm in Phoenix that specialized in HOA disputes. They wanted to hire me as a consultant to help homeowners document their cases when they believed their HOAs were acting improperly. "You understand the process," the senior partner explained. "You know what evidence matters, how to document everything, and how to navigate the legal system. You could help a lot of people." I agreed, and for the next several years, I worked part-time helping homeowners fight back against abusive HOAs. Some cases settled quickly, others went to trial. But every single person I helped was someone who might otherwise have been steamrolled by a petty tyrant with a clipboard and too much power. The work was satisfying in a way my regular job never had been. My day job paid the bills, but this felt like it mattered. Every victory, every settlement, every case where we forced an HOA to back down and follow their own rules properly was another small correction to a system that had gotten out of balance. 5 years after the original incident, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Brenda Patterson. The envelope had a Nevada return address, and I almost threw it away without opening it. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short and handwritten. It said, "Mr. Crawford, I know this is inadequate, but I want to apologize for what I did to you. I was wrong. I let power go to my head, and I destroyed something valuable because of my own pettiness and spite. I've spent the last 5 years on probation thinking about what I did, and I'm ashamed. I know you have no reason to forgive me, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I recognize how wrong I was. I hope you've been able to move forward. Sincerely, Brenda Patterson." I read the letter twice, then set it aside. I didn't respond. What was there to say? An apology couldn't bring back the original Winnebago, couldn't give me back the 6 months I'd spent restoring it, couldn't undo the stress of the legal battle. But maybe it meant something that she'd finally acknowledged the damage she'd caused. Or maybe it didn't matter at all. I'd moved on. The settlement money was long spent, the new Winnebago was completely restored, and had taken me on adventures across the country, and I'd found meaningful work helping other people fight back against HOA abuse. Brenda Patterson's apology was something she needed to send for her own peace of mind, but I didn't need to receive it for mine. I folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and went back to work on my current project, a 1985 Airstream that needed new wiring. Life went on. One restoration project at a time, one HOA case at a time, one small victory at a time. And that crushed cube of metal that had once been my pride and joy became a story I told, a lesson I shared, and a reminder that sometimes the fight itself is what matters most. The HOA eventually became a model for reform in Arizona. Kevin Hart and the rest of the board implemented policies that other communities started copying. Transparent budgets, reasonable enforcement, clear appeals processes, and term limits for board members. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Much better than it had been under Brenda Patterson's reign. And sometimes when I was working on a restoration project late at night, I'd think back to that morning when I stood in my driveway looking at the empty concrete pad. I'd been so angry, so ready to give up and just accept the loss. But I'd fought instead, and that choice had rippled out into changes I never could have anticipated. My original Winnebago was gone, crushed and recycled into rebar or car parts or some other anonymous metal product. But its destruction had meant something. It had exposed corruption, led to reform, and given me a purpose I hadn't known I needed. That seemed like a fair trade, even though I'd never have chosen it if given the option. The sun set behind my house, painting the empty concrete pad in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow I'd park the new Winnebago there, breaking my self-imposed prohibition. It was time to reclaim that space, to stop treating it like a grave, and start treating it like what it was meant to be, a place to work on something I loved. Life in Meadowbrook Estates continued, quieter now and saner, with neighbors who talked to each other instead of reporting each other for microscopic violations. The community I'd fought to change was finally the kind of place worth living in. And every day, when I drove past the perfectly reasonable 4-inch grass and the mailboxes that were allowed to be slightly different shades of black, I felt satisfied knowing that my crushed RV had bought all of us a little more freedom. That was worth $60,000 and 6 months of work. That was worth the stress and the anger and the fear. That was worth everything it had cost me and then some. Justice had been served. The criminal had been convicted. The system, flawed as it was, had eventually worked. And I'd learned that sometimes standing up for what's right means losing something valuable in order to gain something even more important. In my case, I'd lost a vintage RV but gained a community, a purpose, and the knowledge that abusive power can be challenged and defeated. Not a bad trade, all things considered. Not bad at all.